Let's try that again. There we go.
Perfect. There we go. Great,
So I'm
great.
sorry that I'm late. I had a weird difficulty connecting. So
Yeah, no, I assumed as such. Yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, thank you so much for being here. Of course. So yeah, and thank you everyone who is in attendance tonight. We will also be posting this on YouTube afterwards for people who weren't able to make it. But um, I'll start off by giving a brief introduction. Um, we are joined by recent PhD graduate Harrison Oakes. And we're hoping tonight that Harrison will be generous enough with us to tell us a little bit about his academic journey, and hopefully we will get some kind of golden nuggets to take away as far as information that might help us with our plans that are ever changing as undergraduates. I'll just admit another person. So yeah, we'll keep it brief here tonight on my end because I know that we're all getting Zoom fatigue. So without further ado, Harrison, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your current position at the university and I guess maybe your research focus and some projects that you're up to at the moment?
sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to chat with you and provide some feedback. Definitely remember being in your shoes, sort of collectively preparing for grad school in my undergrad, and it's almost surreal to think I'm now on this other side of grad school. So anyway, so currently I don't technically have an official position at the University of Waterloo. I finished my PhD last March, and this year is a bit of a gap year for me, if you will. So I didn't have an academic or a postdoc position lined up after my final year, which is just another part of my very non-traditional story through academia, because normally I would have. So I've been working as a research associate with some researchers at the University, Wilfrid Laurier University. I also have two research contracts, rather, with a company. We work in support of the Canadian Armed Forces. And I was teaching up until the end of winter term at the University of Waterloo. So, and my research. Largely, my research is, it focuses on identity processes within different social contexts and how those contexts inform perception of people's identities, suspicion of people perhaps having identities that they say they don't have, or not having the identities that they say they do have. And I do most of my work with a focus on sexual minorities, and a little bit with gender minorities as well.
Great, yeah, that's a great basis for us to go off of. So in the talks that we've had together in the past, you've talked about how you had kind of a non-traditional path as far as how you got into psychology, that you started your undergraduate a little bit later. So I was just wondering how it was to start later, and how you found psychology.
For sure. So interestingly enough, when I graduated high school, I didn't think I was good enough to go to university. And I grew up in a culture where higher education isn't really valued, and no one in my community had ever gone to university. And so I grew up thinking that it was something that like really rich people did, that I would never be able to do because I grew up in a really poor community. And so I went and pursued some other things for a while. I wanted to go to university, but I just didn't quite think that I was good enough for it. And I also didn't know how I would afford it. So I decided to just explore life a little bit, to figure out what exactly I wanted. Figured if I was going to go into debt for education, then I needed to not replicate the pattern of like finishing a BA and being like, I hate my fucking degree, so I need to get a new one. Like, you know, and I really didn't want to do that. So pardon my language. And so I worked in factories for a while. I went and lived in another province. I did my training to teach English as a second language. So I went to Mexico, did a practicum down there, and then ended up moving to Ukraine and teaching at a private British school there for 2 years. And that was really when I got the strong push to go back to school. And so I came back to Canada and applied to a school that was close to where my family lived, because I didn't know that it was a thing that you like try to go to different kinds of universities. Like I knew nothing about it. So I was just like, oh, this university is close to here. Hopefully they'll accept me. I wanted to go into theater, to be an actor. And so I got into the university, applied to the theater arts program, started training in drama. It was awesome. I loved it. After my first term, through a course I took and the instructor and connections and stuff like that, I got a unique opportunity to audition for the Winnipeg School of Contemporary Dancers, which is one of 3 accredited contemporary dance training centers in Canada. They also have a program with University of Winnipeg's theater arts program. So for some reason they accepted me. I have no idea why. But I got into the dance program, and so I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to be a dancer now. So I spent 2 years training to be a professional dancer, and then injury kind of sidelined that career. And so I was kind of like frustrated because I found myself back at sort of what felt like square one, where I was like, okay, like that very thing that I spent 5 years trying to find myself to avoid, like I've now spent 2 years pursuing a degree that now I am not going to pursue. So now I have to start over. And so I was a little frustrated by that. But I just took a sampling of a few things I was interested in. Psychology was one of them. And by the middle of the course, I had kind of realized that I found home. And so after that, I just dove into my psychology studies sort of head first. I think you also asked some questions about like, what was it like coming to school later?
Yeah.
For the most part, it was okay. I found that I had a lot of advantages over my peers who had gone from high school straight into university. And the majority of those advantages came from life experience. So having spent 5 years knowing what it's like to try to find work without real academic credentials, having to work in factories, knowing what that was like, and then having the super unique opportunity to go to Ukraine, live there for 2 years internationally, immerse myself in a new culture, but also have the opportunity to work at a very high level in the private British school there. I had a lot of really unique opportunities that gave me a lot of different perspectives on life. And I found that experience, like it's hard to put into words the advantage that it gave me, but it was just very obvious that it gave me an advantage over my peers, because by the time I came to university, I knew what I was there to do. I knew what I wanted to get out of it. And so I was able to apply myself more earlier than the majority of my peers. And that's really what set me apart from them. And I think is what ultimately got me into grad school.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So yeah, I was just going to ask about in your undergraduate, who was it, or was there a certain maybe class or event that took place that was your influence in how you chose your specific focus that you've now chosen to pursue?
Yeah. Yeah, it was my social psychology class taught by Dr. Danielle Gaucher, who's actually a graduate of the social psychology PhD program at the University of Waterloo. She was hired at my school, and she taught my class, and I just fell in love with social psychology. I felt that I had found the type of psychology that would allow me to ask and answer, hopefully, the types of questions that I was personally interested in, which is very like social justice oriented types of questions. And I pestered her term to give me an opportunity to do some research. And by about halfway through the course, maybe 2/3 of the way through the course, she finally relented and gave me an opportunity to do something. And that was, that was the start. And then the rest was kind of history.
Yeah, that is great. I guess thinking back to that undergraduate experience,
Mhm.
what do you feel, from your vantage point now, what do you feel was really valuable in how you spent your time there? And is there anything you wish you would have done more knowing what you know now?
Right. Well, um, again, kind of an example to get at what I was saying earlier about the unique sort of advantages that I had as an older student. After my after finishing my intro to psychology course and deciding that was what I wanted to pursue, um, the professor who taught it had a sort of a meeting with students at the end of the course who wanted to pursue psychology as their major. She told us about becoming members in CPA, like the Canadian Psychology Association, and just a little bit about things like that. And so I was like super eager, super gung ho. I was like, yes, sign me up. And so she sponsored me to sign up for it. And I saw that CPA was having a conference in Toronto that summer. And so I signed up for the conference. I was like, sweet, I'll fly to Toronto and visit friends of mine, and then I'll go check out this conference and see what is what. And I thought that was like a totally normal thing to do. Um, and so because I didn't know the sort of standards or like the traditional like norms, I was just like, yeah, of course I'm going to go to this conference and figure out like what's up with psychology. And so when I went to the conference, I made a point of going to every session that was hosted by the Graduate Student Association, which was really eye-opening for me, because they talked a lot about getting into grad school. They talked a lot about what it took to succeed in grad school, et cetera, et cetera. I went to some talks about funding and how hard and competitive funding is and all those things. And so when I left the conference, I had had a huge fire built under my butt, so to speak, because I was like, it's really competitive and really hard to get into good grad schools and to get funded and all these things. And I thought, and that's when I started to realize about like the sort of the broader world of higher education and like who we're up against in competition for top spots. And I realized that I didn't have a very good chance of, because I wasn't at like a big name undergraduate school. So I was going to have to make up for that somehow. And so when I came back for the next year of school, which was technically the second year of my undergrad in psychology, I just like was like, all right, I have to start doing research. I have to do as much as I can. And so that was why I was pestering Danielle the entire fall term, like, please give me an opportunity, give me an opportunity, give me an opportunity. And as soon as she gave me an opportunity, I just ran. And I can say now, being in similar situations, like when you have an undergraduate student who, goes out of their way to really demonstrate their eagerness, and then you give them a small opportunity, and if they take that opportunity and they do the most with it that they can do with it, it really it's motivating on the other end, and it makes you want to invest and give them more opportunities. Um, and so, yeah, I just started to do a lot of research. My research ended up getting a lot of attention because of timely issues that it was involved in. It gave me a lot of public speaking opportunities. I volunteered to be the co-president of like the Psychology Students Association, just anything like that that I could get some experience. I mean, primarily I was trying to get as much research experience as possible. I had a unique opportunity to get some publications as an undergrad. All of these, which are, all of these things, they sort of were what gave me the competitive edge to get into Waterloo. And I also want to say, like, if you're an undergraduate student who's at all like me, where when you like look at things on paper, like, oh, this person did this, and this, I'll never get to do that, so I may as well not try. That's 100% me. I am that person. And the way that I've dealt with that is I sort of picture myself as like, those horses that are like tied up to different things, like let's say buggies that they're pulling, and they have the blinders on the side so they can't see the traffic on the side of the road. That's very much how I went through undergrad and graduate school. I didn't pay attention very much to what other people were doing or accomplishing, because if I focused on what they were doing and accomplishing, I felt like a complete failure, and it like took the wind out of my sails. And I wasn't able to do it. I just knew that I had to work as hard as I possibly could work, make the sacrifices. Like I forewent a job and funding so that I could work part-time as a research assistant. And so my student loans were a little bit higher in my undergrad than I wanted them to be, but it enabled me to get more research experience. I also deliberately never took a full-time course load. What I mean by that is we could take between 3 and 5 courses in a term. And once you took 3 courses, it was considered full-time studies. So I always only took 3 courses so that I would just meet the criteria for full-time studies, but so that I wouldn't be maxed out. And then that extra time that I wasn't devoting to classes, I was spending on research and advancing my research, advancing my professors' research and things like that. And I made a lot of strategic decisions like that to try to take a situation in which I didn't have a lot to work with and make the most out of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. So I guess in the next step of things, when it came to applying to grad school, what considerations were you making? Like, I'm not sure if you were feeling more confident at that point that you were, a really strong candidate because of all this research experience that you had built up. And I was also going to kind of ask in conjunction with that, how did you first meet your graduate supervisor and kind of build that relationship a little bit?
For sure. So I pissed a lot of my supervisors off when I applied to grad school, which is, it's kind of funny. But, I was hearing about like my colleagues who were applying to like 10, 12 grad schools. And I was like, holy cow, like who can even like manage to complete that many applications at such a high standard that you like have a chance of getting into all of them. And I had a lot of trouble trying to figure out where I wanted to go, who I wanted to work with. I didn't have a good sense of what I was looking for. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So actually applying to grad school for me was a really sort of lackluster experience because I just was not thrilled about much of anything, largely because I didn't have a solid idea of what I wanted to do. I wanted to move to a metropolis from Winnipeg, and so I prioritized big American schools. I also wanted to go to a prestigious graduate program, but I really only found a few people I thought I might want to work with. One of them was Richard Ibach at University of Waterloo. I wasn't going to apply to Waterloo. I was actually not going to apply to any graduate schools in Canada. But Danielle basically like twisted my arm into saying, you have to apply to at least one. And she really, really encouraged me to go to Waterloo. So it was the only Canadian school I applied to. And then I applied to New York, NYU, and I also applied to University of Southern California. I didn't get accepted into either of the American schools, so whatever. But I did get accepted into Waterloo. And the reason I said earlier that I like pissed off my supervisors because they thought that I was being really arrogant by only applying to 3 graduate programs. That really wasn't the case. It wasn't a sense of, I think I'm so good that I'm going to get into these top programs. It was more a sense of, for me, like I had worked so hard for 3 years to get into the best program that I wasn't going to apply to sort of B levels. I don't know. They talk about like A level schools, B level schools, C level schools type of thing. I wasn't going to apply to so-called B level schools just as a backup because I knew that if I got into it, I wouldn't be happy because it's not what I worked for. I would rather have not been accepted and then taken another year to make myself more competitive. Luckily for me, I got in my first attempt, and Igor Grossman actually made the call to accept me into graduate school, and I had never met him before. So we were both going to be at the same conference in, I think it was actually just a few weeks after I got the acceptance. And so then I ended up meeting a lot of the U Waterloo graduate students and professors at that conference, including having a coffee with Igor about just the program and working with him. And then a few weeks after that, I came to Waterloo for my actual official campus visit.
So did your mentor in your undergraduate have a relationship with Richard then, and kind of oh cool, yeah. So what do you think was the big factor then that I'm not sure if Richard's ever talked to you about this, but what was the thing that made him really want to take you on and have that confidence in you?
Well, Richard hasn't, because he's not the one that made me the offer. When I started graduate school at Waterloo, I was actually Igor Grossman's student. And then Hillary Seeker was my secondary supervisor. And Hillary has told me a few times about some of the things in my application that really stood out to them. Number one, I think, is the fact that I was a co-author on a JPSP paper. That's so unheard of. Even in grad school, that's relatively rare. And like, that it's kind of almost just a fluke that no, it's not a total fluke that I got that opportunity, but it's really not, I don't know. It's not something that I would advise the majority of undergraduate students to shoot for, because I think it was just a circumstantial thing that played out in my favor. But even if it hadn't been JPSP, like having a publication in a peer-reviewed journal as an undergraduate student makes you stick out like crazy. And then I actually really don't know what would have been most important after that. I think it's just my public, I was co-author on a book chapter and co-author on a JPSP, and those things immediately sort of make you stick out from the rest. But it was also, I think, a lot of the community involvement I had based on my academic research, and then sort of the knowledge mobilization projects that I had been involved in. And if that term knowledge mobilization isn't familiar to some folks, it's just basically talks about when you have research findings and then you translate them into some sort of a consumable good for the general public. I had about 3 years of experience volunteering for a national organization being involved in that work. So
yeah, that does sound like a great opportunity. I might look into if Waterloo is doing anything in that after this, actually. Um, yeah. So once you were in your graduate degree, I guess, um, what were things that you felt you really didn't expect to happen? Things in your experience that you didn't really know going into it, maybe positive and negative, because I'm sure there's a bit of both.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say grad school was such a mixed bag for me. I absolutely hated it and I absolutely loved it. Um, I have often said to incoming grad students, one of the most difficult aspects of grad school is the mental health component. And I struggled with my mental health tremendously. Like grad school started in September, and by that first December, like I was borderline suicidal. Um, and I was wholly unprepared for how grueling the mental health sort of component of grad school can be. It isn't for everyone, but for me, it was, and for a lot of students, it is. There's a lot of things that are different with grad school. So one of the things that I found really hard to deal with was in undergrad, you constantly have these markers of your performance level, right? So whether it's assignments that you're handing in multiple times throughout a term in a course, or whether it's your GPA or things like that, there's always these sort of numerical indicators of how you're doing. And there isn't any of that in grad school. And so I found it really hard to transition to a climate where I couldn't get an objective read on how well I was doing as a grad student. So everything becomes quite a bit more subjective that way. There's like so much pressure. Imposter syndrome is crazy. You really, really gotta like, if there's like one amazing thing you could do for yourself in preparation for grad school, it would be like learning how to get a solid handle on the imposter syndrome, because I've seen it wreck so many students' lives or just enjoyment out of life, things like that. And yeah, surprisingly, the workload wasn't something I struggled with. I went into grad school fully expecting that the workload would be insane. And it was. And so I wasn't surprised by that, but I wasn't at all prepared for the mental health component. That was really hard for me and a lot of students. And some of the positives, um, I, it just, yeah, I don't know. Like I love research. I love learning, and so it was just really cool to be able to start diving into all of that on such a deeper level. Um, and yeah, there's just you get into this like routine, and I just really enjoyed uh, pushing boundaries, like academically. I created sort of my own PhD through a special sort of loophole that Waterloo Psychology Department has. And so I stepped outside of psychology to go to leisure sciences to supplement my quantitative training through social psychology with qualitative inquiry training over in rec studies. And it's just the richness of like the different topics and theories and conversations and learning to see your research question from different perspectives, super important. And it's what my ultimate social psychological dissertation came out of my exposure to sociology, for example. I'm just gonna turn on the light here. I think whoa, that's not what I wanted. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Great. So yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that your plan kind of you're making things up as you're going along a little bit in your graduate studies, and your plan was changing.
No, 100.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And just also hearing you say that when you're applying, you weren't super kind of gung-ho on any given direction. Do you think that that's something that you would recommend for
Hell no.
undergraduates? No? Okay, okay.
I'm so envious of people who know what they want to do. It's sorry, I cut your question off. Continue.
That's what I was just gonna say. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, I will say this. I spent way more time in existential crisis mode throughout grad studies than I ever cared to remember. I feel like the 6 years of my PhD were basically one long extended existential crisis. And that really sucked. That was really that was really hard to go through, and it definitely did not help my mental health. But there were some really good reasons for those, and it wasn't just the same issue I kept dealing with. It kept changing the issues I was dealing with. As you learn more about academia, and you start to see like the dark underside of academia, and you see how oppressive it is as a regime, as an institution, and all these different things that I started to struggle with as I went through. Those were good. I was having the sort of existential crisis for good reasons, and what ultimately came of it is something that I would never trade for anything. It's what pushed me into a direction to leave social psychology and pursue training in rec and leisure sciences, right? And that expanded not only my methodological tool belt, it expanded my theoretical knowledge. It blew open a whole new sort of domain of networking for me. And ultimately, it made me a much better scholar because it taught me to approach research problems from a completely different perspective, with a completely different methodology, with completely different prioritization of questions and things like that. And so now when I can take that knowledge and I can take the traditional social psychological knowledge and I can mix them together, it really allows me to step outside the box. And I mean, my journey as an academic from the start until now has been anything but traditional, and that aligns really well with who I am as a person. And I think because of that, I've also had a great deal of success with doing work outside of the box that ultimately has sort of come full circle and been hugely rewarding for me. Like I spent the majority of my PhD training feeling like I had no idea if I was doing anything that even mattered or was worthwhile, because I wasn't following the traditional path. I had no one to compare myself to. And that is a really difficult space to occupy, because again, it's that you don't even have, like, you can't even really compare yourself with your peers because they're not doing the same thing that you're doing. And so their markers of success don't necessarily apply to you. And so I thought for a long time that I was a complete failure. But I just kept trucking along and doing my best. And then when I graduated last year, I won the Governor General's Gold Medal for my dissertation, largely because, and I credit that, and the reason, or what my referees rather, really sold my work on, was how innovative it was, because it combined all of these different perspectives, and then also how connected it was to real world implications. And a lot of that comes from this very messy, uncomfortable trajectory of sort of being in different spaces, not feeling like I fit in anywhere, just like searching and searching and searching for the place that I belong, and never really finding it, but like taking everything I was learning along the way and informing what I was doing as I moved forward with it. So in the end, I won the Governor General's Gold Medal, and I was like, oh, okay, so like someone thinks the work that I did was worthwhile, right? And now I have just, I'm going to start a postdoc in October in London, England, working at University College London, which is like one of the top 5 universities in the world for research. And I am going on the Banting Fellowship, which is Canada's most prestigious postdoc. And like, I'm kind of sitting here being like, what the fuck is going on? Like, why is this happening? And I'm not saying it to like pat myself on the back. I'm saying it because I legitimately felt like a complete failure through the majority of my PhD. And I fully anticipated coming out of my PhD and flopping flat on my face and like making nothing out of myself and going nowhere with my life. But I didn't give up, and I kept trying my best, hoping that something would stick, and it has stuck in a huge way. So the motto there, I guess, is like, even if you feel like you're a complete failure and you feel like the work you're doing is shit and like you're never going to get anywhere, and even if you are meeting sort of objective markers of failure, like, don't let it keep you on the ground. Like, sure, we get knocked down, we need time to sit and catch our breath, but we got to get back up, we got to keep fighting, and just pushing yourself forward regardless of what you're pursuing or what direction you're going in, whether it's academia, industry, something completely different, entrepreneurship. Just got to keep pushing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, congratulations with those recent promotions too. I guess all this being said, what do you feel like you would say to current undergraduates as to if graduate studies is the right fit for them or not? Is there any kind of key indicators looking back that you can say for that? Yeah.
Well, I would say the first thing is not everybody needs to have a PhD. Absolutely not everybody needs to have a PhD. It is not the be all end all. It is really fucking hard, mentally and also just intellectually. There's too many people that I see go into grad school because it's what their parents think they should do. And I think that's a huge mistake. On the other hand, I'll say some people just know what they want to do and they're just like, boom, 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 I'm going to go do it. And they are like rock stars. And I'm like, I have no idea what kind of human being you are, but all the power to you. And so everybody's different. You got to figure out who you are. I often say to people who went from high school straight into university, like, take a year off at least from your bachelor's degree before you go into your master's program. I really, really honestly believe that the extra life experience and perspective that I got by doing that has made me it's given me an advantage over folks who haven't gotten that type of perspective. Also, like, if you graduate with your BA and you go into the real world, you find a job. I mean, if you're going to take a year off between like university and your undergrad and then potentially pursuing like graduate studies, like, make the most of it. Don't just get a job like down the road working full time, like, and be stuck in that. Like, use it as a year to enrich your life in a way that goes beyond sort of the normative ways that most people would sort of pursue life after a BA. Go live in another country if you can. Or volunteer for international opportunities. Pursue an interest that you've not really had the chance to pursue. If you can, the more sort of let me try to say this in a different way. The more in tune you are with like what drives you as a human being, the better off you're going to be equipped during grad school to keep your eye on sort of the trajectory that you're headed on. And I know that I'm probably the worst person to be giving you advice about marking your trajectory, because I feel like I was just like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Part of that is being a first generation student as well, I will say. not knowing the hidden curriculum is the hidden curriculum really amps up in grad school, by the way. And so there's that.
Do you want to like talk about the hidden curriculum? I don't think I've ever heard that. Maybe that's more common than
Oh,
I'm
okay.
aware of, but yeah.
Yeah. So hidden curriculum, all my first generation buddies and folks are I didn't understand it until I was further along in my PhD and I got involved in the student leadership of the largest social and personality psychology organization. And I started to like spend a lot of time with students from Ivy League schools and things like that from in the States. And then I really started to get the difference. There's a real difference between folks who come from that sort of a path through university versus someone like myself. Other types of like hidden curriculum, it's hard to like pinpoint, but it's the I don't know, there's just so many like sort of small assumptions of like that you'll know that you need to do this thing, or you'll know that you need to do this other thing, or um, even things like networking with other colleagues. How do you do that? And I know that that isn't necessarily just a first generation thing, but it's just like that. That's what I mean. Like it's those kind of small things. They're not usually like massive, like, oh my God, I had no idea this was a thing. I know that I went through those, but grad school also gives you like hardcore amnesia. So some of it is probably motivated forgetting. So I don't, yeah. Oh, convocation is a big one. So I remember like when I did my master's convocation, there were so many things that I didn't know about how convocation operated at big schools, or like things that I was supposed to be aware of in terms of different things. And I ended up like emailing the university after my master's convocation being like, hey, as a first generation student, this assumption, this assumption, this assumption, this assumption, you just expected us to know, I had no idea about. And so as a result, like my family kind of got fucked in terms of like not being able to be part of my convocation, or like, like getting, I don't know, just having like really poor access to the actual convocation ceremony or different things like that. And it's just like a bunch of assumptions that people assume that you know, and you don't realize that you don't know them until you like mess up, so to say. And someone's like, you didn't do this thing. You're like, what thing? That's a thing? Since when is that a thing? And they're like, well, it's a thing. And you're like, okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, that's huge to consider for sure. Yeah. Um, just before we end off tonight, I know we've gone a little bit past our planned time, but um, I was gonna ask, uh, what what were your career goals when you entered your graduate studies, and how have they changed based on what you found rewarding actually being in those graduate studies and interacting with different people?
Yeah, that's a great question. My goal at the beginning was to be a professor at a university.
Mm-hmm.
And oh man, if I I have definitely lost track of the amount of times that I have flipped between I absolutely fucking hate academia and I wouldn't touch it with 100-mile pole. It is so fucking toxic, to being like, oh, I really love research and I like love like discovering new insights about these things. And so I really can't let go of academia because I want to be able to do research and to be able to do research on like really socially important topics and to contribute to that knowledge. And then, yeah, so it's been this back and forth of like hating the system, hating the toxicity. But then when I leave, missing the opportunity to do research on issues that I really care about, which is what drew me to social psychology in the first place. So no surprise, that has continued straight through my PhD. It continued in the last year since I finished my PhD. But right now, I am back on academia train. So we'll see how long that lasts. But
Yeah. Well, I wish you best of luck with that, and any other changes that might happen in the future with that. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a very candid look into your experience. I think that that's, you know, something that we all kind of crave, not just the same old things that everyone hears. So this has been amazing. Yeah, thank you so much.
yeah, you're super welcome. And you know, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is mentoring other students through the process, especially like students who kind of find themselves on non-traditional paths or who think of themselves as, you know, like a non-traditional scholar or student. I'm super passionate about helping them navigate the system because we really need more non-traditional voices, if you will, in academia.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you again. Appreciate your time, and hope you have a
Absolutely.
good night. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Same to you.
Yeah. Bye,
Okay.
everyone. Thanks for attending.